Scattered throughout most of Eastern and Western Europe are the remains of a once powerful empire. Crumbling and overgrown, yet hauntingly silent, these monumental structures that were built to last 1,000 years have now become the graveyard of a culture and ideology that ended with the death of the Third Reich. September 1934, the annual celebration of the Nazi Party Congress known as Reichsparteitage. The spectacular event, which lasted more than a week, was intended to honor the Führer and at the same time demonstrate Germany's growing military power. The city that Hitler chose as the spiritual center of the Third Reich and site of his Nazi Party rallies was the medieval town of Nuremberg. Founded in the 11th century as a base for military campaigns throughout Bohemia, the city of Nuremberg rapidly grew into an important cultural and trade center. For more than 500 years, the fortress-like town with its warm sandstone walls and magnificent collection of imposing towers thrived in the imperial atmosphere of the great Kaisers and kings, while gaining a reputation as the treasure chest of the German Empire. Perched on a hill overlooking the town is the royal castle known as the Kaiserburg. The historic buildings, which date back to the 12th century, once served as the imperial residence of Friedrich the Great and Frederick Barbarossa, king of the Holy Roman Empire. Today, the Imperial Kaiserburg has become one of Germany's most popular tourist attractions. Castle Hill overlooks a city that in 1933 was thrown into the international spotlight when Adolf Hitler officially proclaimed Nuremberg the Stadt der Reichsparteitage, city of the Reichsparty days. It was the combination of Nuremberg's rich imperial history, as well as its direct ties to ancient Rome, that convinced Hitler that the town was the perfect setting for his spectacular mass rallies. But it was also the town's close ties to the Nazis that ultimately led to its near total devastation by Allied bombs on January 2, 1945. Lovingly and painstakingly restored, piece by piece from the ground up, the city stands today as a testament to the vitality and determination of its people. A few days before the annual rally began, the town was decorated with thousands of Nazi flags as the party faithful began filling the streets of Nuremberg. Hitler would usually arrive on the first day of the rally, which was marked by great fanfare and celebration. After a brief 20-minute motorcade through the streets of the old city, the Führer would reach his final destination at the Deutscher Hof Hotel. It was here that Hitler and other members of the Nazi leadership would set up residency during the week-long events, while hosting lavish parties and official receptions. Hitler's private quarters were centrally located on the second floor and consisted of 2 bedrooms and a large sitting room. The hotel's oversized front windows allowed the Führer to make impromptu appearances to his adoring public. The first of the Nuremberg rallies was held here at the Luitpold Field in August 1927. The park's enormous size, along with a sloping knoll which formed a natural stage, provided the perfect setting for the mass rallies and Hitler's fiery speeches. Between the 19th and 21st of August, a crowd of about 30,000 party loyalists gathered to hear Hitler's passionate pleas for a new Germany. Nuremberg was chosen as the permanent site for the rallies following similar meetings in Munich in 1923 and Weimar in 1926. By the time the Party Congress of 1929 was held in the first week of August, the crowds had dramatically grown to more than 100,000 people, which illustrated the rapid growth of National Socialism and the popularity of Adolf Hitler. For the first official Reichsparty rally of 1933, a large temporary wooden grandstand was constructed on the sloping knoll so that the Führer could be clearly seen by the more than 500,000 people now in attendance. It was also in 1933 that architect Albert Speers was commissioned with the task of transforming the peaceful park into a giant stone monolith, a project that Hitler inspected on a regular basis. Completed in less than 10 months, the new Luitpold Arena occupied almost 6 square miles and consisted of 2 gigantic viewing stands on each side, as well as a sprawling stone grandstand called the Führertribüne at one end and a Kriegsdenkmal or war memorial at the other. Built by the city of Nuremberg, the Kriegsdenkmal was not only the first permanent structure completed on the grounds of the Luitpoldhain, but the first building used by the Nazis for the first official Reichsparty Congress after Hitler came to power in 1933. Originally, the memorial was built to honor the 10,000 soldiers of Nuremberg killed during the First World War. But in 1952, the inscription was changed to include the fallen soldiers of the Second World War, as well as the millions of victims who suffered under Nazi tyranny. Dedicated on July 20th, 1930, 3 years after the Nazis began using the park, Hitler, who realized the symbolic value of heroic death, quickly included the memorial into the ceremonies at the Luitpold Arena. The War Memorial, like other venerated Nazi monuments such as Tannenberg in East Prussia, Walhalla near Regensburg, the Befreiungshalle just outside Kelheim, and the Feldherrnhalle in Munich, were all chosen by Hitler as sacred shrines dedicated to the martyrs of the Nazi movement. After slowly and deliberately making his way from the opposite side of the park, Hitler, flanked by SA Chief Victor Lutze and the Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, would arrive for what would become the most dramatic scene of the week-long rally. The moment of silence was intended to pay tribute to the 16 fallen Nazis killed during the 1923 beer hall putsch, which gave deeper meaning to their sacrifice. The spot where Hitler silently stood remains basically unchanged today, with the exception of a huge concrete pedestal and ceremonial wreath, which was removed shortly after the war. Built by Fritz Meyer, designer of dozens of churches and memorials throughout Germany, the structure's cobbled stone terrace is complemented by 2 rows of torch pillars known as Feuerbühnes. All 14 pillars remain virtually intact, except they haven't been ignited since the last party rally of 1938. Following the cult-like ceremony, Hitler would make his way back to the Führertribüne along an impressive 800-foot granite walkway that symbolized the connection between the fallen warriors at the memorial and the spirit of the new Reich at the Führertribüne. Covering 6 square miles and surrounded by several concrete bleachers capable of seating more than 50,000 spectators, the Luitpold Arena not only served as a shrine, but as the assembly area for the joint roll call of the SS, SA, and members of both the motorized and flying corps. Organized into blocks, columns, and formations, the men shaped human forms of architecture, while at the same time swearing absolute loyalty and obedience to the Führer, the party, and country. These annual demonstrations, which included a 20-minute address by the leader and the sacred consecration of the flags, were not only a pageantry of ever-growing power, but a tribute to the leadership of Adolf Hitler. The imposing Führertribüne with its distinctive speaker's platform was considered the centerpiece of the arena and represented the first permanent structure built by the Nazis in Nuremberg. Completed in the summer of 1934, the crescent-shaped edifice with its impressive 20-foot bronze eagles measured 500 feet long and could seat several hundred dignitaries. Today, the grassy knoll where the tribuna once stood bears little evidence that such an enormous structure ever existed here. A stone stairway leading to the first level of the structure, and a pathway in the same crescent-shaped form as the tribuna, is all that remains of the colossal structure. A walk along the original granite walkway that surrounds the entire park not only gives visitors an idea of the sheer size and dimension of the site, but offers the best evidence that the former Nazi arena was located here. Situated adjacent to the Führertribüne was the Luitpoldhalle, which functioned as the convention or Congress Hall. Dating back to the Bavarian Exposition of 1906, the building was renovated by the Nazis in time for the Party Congress of 1934. The impressive neoclassic facade with its shell limestone facing was completed the following year and featured 3 enormous entrance portals, which led to the dramatic red and gold interior that could seat 16,000 party members. The hall measured 540 feet long and 150 feet wide and featured the largest pipe organ in Germany. Hitler's arrival in the hall marked the opening day of the annual Party Congress. It was here in 1935 that the Nazis adopted the notorious Nuremberg laws, which deprived German Jews and other minorities of their citizenship. Typically, the Party Congress would open with a dedication of memoriam, followed by remarks by various members of the party leadership, and finally the address and proclamation by the Fuhrer, which sent the audience into a near frenzy. Severely damaged by Allied bombs in early 1945, the building was replaced by a parking lot. But the grand staircase, once leading to the entrance, remains completely intact today. Occasionally, the steps are used as seating for various events held in the park. While the War Memorial continues to serve as a reminder of what took place here, the former Nazi arena has been returned to the people of Nuremberg as a public park. By 1934, plans called for the Luitpold Arena, which had already outgrown its use, to be incorporated into a vast complex of buildings which eventually became known as the Reichsparteigelände. Originally, the 15 square miles of open field located a few miles south of the city was occupied by nothing more than a popular bathhouse situated on the shores of the Sudentenland. Completed in 1887, the popular facility featured 4 separate swimming areas for men, women, and families. In 1906, the state trade exhibition called the Bavarian Jubilee Show occupied both the Luitpold Field and most of the southwest edge of the Sudentenland. The exhibition, which showcased the latest technology of the time, was dominated by a candy-striped lighthouse with a gold beacon at one end and a temple-like structure which served as the art gallery at the other. Situated directly next door to the art gallery was the Machine Hall, or Luitpoldhalle, the building later converted by the Nazis as their small Congress Hall. At the time, Nuremberg was the largest industrial city in Bavaria. Within 4 years of its opening, only a few structures from the exhibition remained, including the future Nazi Congress Hall and several structures at the edge of the lake, which were used by the public for recreation. On May 11, 1912, the Nuremberger Tiergarten Zoo was opened to rave reviews. In its first year alone, the zoo attracted an estimated 400,000 visitors. With its hand-carved stone pillars and bronze statues, the city zoo remained one of Germany's most popular tourist attractions until its closing in 1934. Joining the city zoo in Luitpoldhain and forming the 15-square-mile area known as the Messegelände was the soccer stadium, completed in 1928. Designed by Otto Ernst Schweitzer, the structure was absorbed into the Reich's party grounds after the Nazis came to power in 1933 and used as an assembly and parade area by the Hitler Youth. Meanwhile, back on the grounds of the Luitpoldhain, the War Memorial honoring Nuremberg's fallen soldiers from the First World War was erected on the opposite side of the Machine Hall. But shortly after its dedication in 1930, the Nazis began incorporating the monument into their ceremonies. Eventually, the structure would be completely absorbed into the overall scheme of the massive Nazi parade ground. Following the completion of the Luitpold Arena in 1934, the Nazis then turned their attention to the development of the area just north of the soccer stadium. The construction of the Zeppelinfield would be their greatest project to date. Today, the massive ruins of the Haupttribüne, or main grandstand, represents one of the largest surviving relics of the Third Reich and one of the best examples of the neoclassic style of monumental architecture used by the Nazis throughout Germany. Named after Ferdinand von Zeppelin, who landed his great airship here in 1909, this massive field was the site of colorful pageants, elaborate parades, and military exercises, while 250,000 spectators looked on. Flanking three sides of the colossal field are a series of stone flag towers measuring almost 25 feet high and more than 10 feet wide. Constructed out of brick and covered with Jurassic limestone, the towers were decorated with 6 brightly colored red flags featuring the emblem of the Nazi Party. Containing complete washroom and toilet facilities, each one of the 34 evenly spaced towers were separated by a flight of stairs, which then led to the demonstration field and the wooden spectator bleachers, which are still maintained today. The main field, known as the Zeppelin Wiese, began serving as a major rally site as early as 1933. It became the assembly area for political organizations like the Party Amtswalter, the National Socialist name for secondary and lower-level functionaries and civil servants. The field was surrounded on 3 sides by a series of temporary spectator bleachers, while the enormous wooden tribuna, or main grandstand, capable of seating up to 25,000, dominated the north part of the field. Completed in the summer of 1933, the structure, which provided seating for party dignitaries and special guests, featured a gigantic iron eagle with a wingspan of nearly 100 feet. There were more than 300,000 people in attendance when Adolf Hitler made his first appearance on the Zeppelinfield in September 1933. The occasion was marked by a theatrical presentation of the flags and a ceremonial roll call by the Party Amtswalter. The following year, the Zeppelinfield became the permanent exhibition site for the National Labor Service, the Reichs Arbeitsdienst. It was also in 1934 that the field was used for the first time for various parades, vehicle demonstrations, and war games by the military, which continued until the last party rally in 1938. Twilight pageants were also introduced for the first time in 1934. The pageantry of lights and flags became one of the most popular features of the Nuremberg rallies. The job of constructing the Zeppelinfield into a gigantic stone and marble amphitheater was given to Albert Speers. After gaining Hitler's trust with the reconstruction of the Luitpold Arena, the talented architect was about to become the master builder of the Third Reich. The first permanent structure, which actually formed the nucleus of the main grandstand, was completed for the rally of 1935. Speers' new creation consisted of a 2-tier stone edifice, accented by a gold eagle and swastika that rose more than 120 feet in the air. When the Zeppelinfield was finally completed in the summer of 1937, it not only became the second permanent structure built by the Nazis on the Nuremberg rally grounds, but represented one of the Third Reich's greatest architectural achievements to date. Designed in the likeness of an ancient Greek altar, the main grandstand, called the Haupttribüne, measured more than 1,100 feet long, 80 feet high, and could seat up to 70,000 people. The massive tribuna, along with the 34 stately stone towers, each with their 6 brightly colored flags, combined to form an immense quadrangle. Speer adorned his dramatic altar-like edifice with 144 stone columns, anchored on each end by a gigantic pylon, rising to a height of more than 80 feet. The center of the Zeppelin tribuna, which consisted of the speaker's podium, was decorated with a deep red oversized banner featuring the party emblem and crowned by a giant gold-plated swastika. On April 24, 1945, 4 days after the capture of Nuremberg, the U.S. 7th Army held a victory parade, and shortly afterwards blasted the gold-plated swastika from its pedestal. For the next 47 years, the Americans continued to use the field as a parade ground and sports facility. Today, the ruins of the main grandstand, as well as the flag towers surrounding the field, attract an estimated 100,000 visitors a year to view one of the largest surviving relics of the Third Reich. As with many of the Reich government buildings completed between 1934 and 1939, the structures were made primarily out of brick and then faced with either limestone or marble tiles. The Zeppelin Tribuna was designed in the typical style of Nazi architecture known as neoclassic, and still bears the outline of the swastika, which was located directly below the speaker's platform. According to Speer, Hitler appreciated the permanent qualities of the classical design, which became a signature style of architecture throughout the Third Reich. These monumental structures, with their bold and austere facades, featured solid stone cubes and straight columns, complemented by heavy recessed doors encased in granite frames. The elevation of the Führer's platform not only emphasized Hitler's position as the leader of the Reich, but the center of all things which was to be admired and glorified. While the Tribuna's altar-like design was meant to ascend Hitler to a godlike image, its massive porticos of stone pillars was intended to symbolize the absolute strength and authority of the regime. Measuring 30 feet high and 3 feet wide, the stately pillars gave the impression of an ancient altar on one side, while leaving a fortress-like appearance on the other. In June 1967, the Municipal Building Committee, claiming that the pillars presented a safety hazard as their primary reason, ordered the demolition of the entire colonnade. A few years later, in 1973, the building was placed under Germany's Historic Monuments Law in order to preserve and protect it from any further destruction. With the exception of some minor alterations to the entrance doors, the structure has remained basically unchanged. Each door, beautifully encased in marble frames, features hand-carved panels, which during the Third Reich were decorated with doorknobs engraved with swastikas. It was through these massive doors, each weighing 500 pounds, that Hitler and his guests entered the lavish gold mosaic and white marble reception hall. At the far end of the room, known as an Ehrenmal, is one of the surviving bronze ornamental fire bowls called a brazier, which was lit on opening day of the Party Congress. The enormous bowls, which were situated at the top of the 80-foot pylons anchoring each end of the tribuna, remain lit throughout the entire rally. Since 1985, the reception hall housed an exhibition called Fascination and Terror, which featured a detailed history of the party grounds from 1927 through 1938. One of its more intriguing exhibits was the collection of anti-aircraft searchlights from Albert Speers' Great Light Show of 1937. By strategically placing 130 of these lights around the perimeter of the field, Speer built a gigantic wall of light, creating what some described as a cathedral of ice. At the same time, Speer created the illusion of a magical light show when he placed 1,200 spotlights and 50 powerful Klieg lights directly behind the main grandstand. Strangely, more than a half a century later, the haunting ruins of the Tribuna still provides a venue for people to experience a sense of community. Several times a year, thousands of spectators fill the former Nazi grandstands to watch various sporting events such as motocross and auto racing. Rock fans, too, have also packed the parade ground to see concerts by the Rolling Stones, U2, Bon Jovi, Van Halen, and Bob Dylan. Just beyond the Zeppelinfield is the Franken Stadium, one of the oldest surviving buildings on the former party grounds and home to the city's champion football team, the Nuremberg Tigers. Built by Otto Ernst Schweitzer and completed in 1928, the only part of the original structure which still survives today is the main entrance. The stadium's front facade beautifully illustrates the original neoclassic design with its attractive straight lines and rectangular windows, complemented by the pristine collection of French doors. In 1953 and again in 1964, the stadium was enlarged from its initial seating capacity of 30,000 to more than 60,000 today. With the first official Reichsparty rally of 1933, the stadium became the gathering place for the Hitler Jugend and Bund Deutsche Mädel, the League of German Girls. Hitler's appearance at the stadium marked the highlight of a week's activities that included parades, sporting events, and a swearing-in ceremony. Themes of community and brotherhood were the cornerstones of speeches by both Hitler and the Reich's youth leader, Balthur von Schirach. The youth stadium was the only other existing building, along with the War Memorial and small Congress Hall on the Luitpold Field, that wasn't built by the Nazis. In 1935, construction began on a great road which connected the stadium in Zeppelinfield with the Luitpold Arena on the opposite side of the Duzenteich. The enormous road, called the Große Straße, stretched over 1.25 miles long, 265 feet wide, and would serve as a model for the future streets of Germania, the capital city of the Reich. In addition to connecting both ends of the Reich's party grounds, the huge road, which was constructed out of more than 60,000 slabs of granite, was also intended to serve as a processional avenue for military parades. Today, it's used as a parking lot for the annual fair. Meanwhile, on the site of the old Nuremberg City Zoo, work began in the new Congress Hall, which would occupy 160,000 square feet of property, becoming the largest structure on the vast area of land known as the Reichsparteitagsgelände, the Reich's party grounds. Construction of the gigantic horseshoe-shaped building began in 1935 and would cost well over 65 million Reichsmarks before the project came to an abrupt end 7 years later. To ensure that the building would meet the exact specifications of its architectural drawings, a full-scale model measuring 90 feet long and nearly 200 feet high was erected adjacent to the construction site. The Congress Hall's design incorporated two completely different styles of architecture. While the horseshoe portion was classically designed in the likeness of the Roman Colosseum, the entrance wing was built in the typical neoclassic style made popular by the Nazis during the Third Reich. The rotunda's enormous interior featured tiered seating for 50,000 people and was accented by a stately collection of rectangular pillars and crowned by a massive glass skylight. Today, the unfinished interior is used mainly as a storage facility, with plans that include everything from a soccer stadium to an enclosed shopping mall. In the late 1940s, a temporary ledge along the upper level of the brick facade, which originally called for a white granite finish, was used as a restaurant and cafe during the Industrial Exhibition of 1949. Designed by Franz and Ludwig Ruf, the monumental hall featured a ground-level open arcade with plain, shallow columns set between the arches. Constructed out of massive granite quarried at Flossenburg and Mauthausen concentration camps, the building now houses several rehearsal halls for the Nuremberg Philharmonic Orchestra, as well as the Nuremberg Documentation Center, which details a complete history of the Reich's party grounds. Today, the uncompleted Congress Hall is the largest surviving structure in Germany built by the Nazis during the Third Reich. A couple of years after construction began in the Congress Hall, groundbreaking ceremonies were held on the site of the new German stadium. However, the colossal Greco-Roman arena, which would have accommodated more than 400,000 spectators, was interrupted by the war and never went beyond the initial grading stages. The only evidence of the enormous structure today is the original cornerstone, which was dedicated in the fall of 1937. And a few scattered pieces of granite where the foundation would have been laid. Had the stadium been completed, it would have exceeded by more than twice the size any other building on the Reichsparteitagsgelände. In addition to the stadium, future plans called for a culture hall adjacent to the Congress building, and a massive arena called the Marsfeld to be located at the opposite end of the Great Road. Construction of the distinctive fortress-like exhibition field began in the summer of 1938 and lasted for more than 5 years before the project was finally abandoned. Measuring 1,980 feet long and 3,280 feet wide, the massive parade field was more than twice the length and more than 3 times the width of the Zeppelinfield. Of the 24 stone towers rising to a height of 125 feet, only 11 were ever completed. The towers remained intact until 1966, when they were demolished to make way for an apartment complex, with the material from the towers reused for the construction of a large retaining wall. Situated just behind the Marzfeld was the SA and Hitler Youth compound known as Langwasser. Consisting of nothing more than a crude collection of barracks and tents, the Langwasser encampment could accommodate up to 200,000 men, which required a small army of cooks and orderlies working around the clock. Adjacent to the SA encampment was Tent City, the Hitler Youth camp known as H.J. Zeltlager. An invitation to the Reichsparteitage was considered a very special honor. Nearby was the KDF village, called Strength Through Joy City. The 5 recreational halls, completed in 1937, provided the general public with the opportunity to participate in the week-long festivities and celebrations of the Party Day rallies. But without question, the most spectacular event was the grandiose parade held in the heart of the city's Old Town. Each year, the streets of Nuremberg were lined with hundreds of thousands of people to watch a 5-hour demonstration of military might and unity, which included every branch of the armed services, dozens of Nazi party organizations, and various paramilitary groups. The first of the great Nuremberg parades, known as Deutschen Tage, or Germany Day, was held in 1923. Its purpose was to commemorate Germany's victory over France in the Battle of Sedan. Among the thousands of spectators that day was the future leader of the German Reich, Adolf Hitler, whose Nazi stormtroopers participated in the spectacular event. When the first Nuremberg Nazi Party rally was held in 1927, the same parade route where the patriotic delegations marched only 4 years earlier was now being retraced by units of Hitler stormtroopers and Nazi political units. And as a reviewing site, Hitler chose the exact same spot where he stood watching the festivities on Germany Day. The Party Congress of 1929 was actually the 4th in a series of 10 annual rallies. The first in 1923 was hosted by the city of Weimar, followed by the Munich rally of 1926, and then the Nuremberg rallies in 1927 and 1929. The Rally of 29 would prove to be the last until Hitler came to power 4 years later. The Victory Parade of 1933, known as Der Congress des Sieges, marked the occasion of 2 important events. It was the first of the official government rallies, which became known as Reichsparteitages, and the last for SA leader Ernst Röhm, who would be executed less than a year later in the bloody purge known as the Night of the Long Knives. Subsequent rallies included Der Congress zu Nuremberg in 1934. But due to the success of Leni Riefenstahl's documentary of the event, it became more commonly known as Triumph of the Wills. In 1935, the Congress of Freedom, known as Der Partei der Freiheit, was held to dramatic fanfare and military exhibition. Then came the Party of Honor in 1936, Der Partei der Ehre, followed by the Party of Work in 1937, Der Partei der Arbeit, and finally in 1938, the last of these propaganda spectacles, Der Partei der Großdeutschland. In an ironic twist of fate, the proposed rally of 1939, which was dedicated to peace, Der Partei des Friedens, was canceled because of the war. The main marketplace, where Adolf Hitler once reviewed his troops more than 6 decades earlier, remains exactly the same today as it did during the Third Reich. The only significant difference is that the name was changed immediately after the war, from the Adolf Hitler Platz to the Hauptmarkt. Another popular rally ground was the classically designed Königsplatz, located in the heart of Munich, the capital city of the movement. With its distinctive Grecian-styled entrance gate, the historic square, which is also flanked by the Florentine Art Gallery housing a rare collection of Roman antiquities on one side, and the Ionic temple-like structure known as the Glyptothek on the other, began serving as a Nazi gathering site as early as 1919. Situated directly opposite the entrance gate at the far end of the Königsplatz were 2 palatial neoclassic mansions, the most notable of which was the 3-story Barlow Palace. Renovated in 1931, shortly after it was purchased by the Nazis, the building was renamed the Braun House and served as the national headquarters of the NSDAP for nearly 7 years. In 1935, the Königsplatz received a facelift when the entire area was covered with granite tiles and 2 new party buildings were constructed at the far end of the square. Completed in 1937, the massive structures not only represented the new architecture of the Reich, but replicated each other in almost every detail. Today, the former Nazi administration building known as the Verwaltungsbau is remarkably unchanged and functions as a school of graphic arts. Its identical twin on the opposite side of the street houses the Munich School of Music, and from 1937 until the end of the war, served as Hitler's Bavarian headquarters. It was here in September 1938 that the Führerbauer Leaders Building made history when it became the site of the infamous Munich Conference. Designed by Hitler's favorite architect, Professor Paul Ludwig Trost, the Führerbau's enormous size and symmetry, like the other new buildings of the Reich, was intended to express the power and authority of the regime. At the extreme end of the Königsplatz, situated between the 2 new party buildings, were the imposing Nazi memorials called Ehrentempels, or Temples of Honor. Designed by Professor Trost and completed in 1935, the huge structures were comprised of an open concrete canopy, accented by a heavily molded cornice, which was supported by 20 fluted columns. Guarded year-round, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day by an SS honor guard known as the Ewige Wache, or Eternal Watch, each of the shrines consisted of 8 iron coffins containing the remains of the martyrs of the movement, the 16 Nazis killed during the 1923 beer hall putsch. On November 9, 1935, the anniversary of the putsch, the fallen Nazi heroes were permanently laid to rest during a pseudo-religious ceremony called Sacrifice of the Dead, Faith of the Living. The spine-chilling ritual included a dramatic roll call of honor in which the names of the dead were ceremoniously called out. Shortly afterwards, the general public was also made to pay homage to the martyrs of the movement. By November 1943, the annual putsch commemoration was reduced to nothing more than a symbolic gesture. The hour-long tribute, which was conducted by Munich Gauleiter Paul Giesler, included a roll call of honor and the ceremonial laying of the wreath on behalf of the Führer and the German people. The solemn event, which marked the last of the ceremonies held at the Ehrentempels, was conducted under the watchful eye of General Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel. Shortly after the war, the remains of the 16 Nazis were removed from their crypts and replaced by a mass of overgrown shrubs and tangled weeds. Today, the structure's huge foundations are the only evidence that the Ehrentempels ever existed. The Führerbau was situated directly behind the old Braun house, which was completely destroyed by Allied bombs in 1944. The new structure, consisting of 3 stories of massive limestone, created a fine balance of simplicity and elegance, with its steeply set of oversized windows, emphasizing the building's horizontal lines. Spanning the entire length of a football field, the Führerbau's enormous size was meant to intimidate and humble foreign heads of state. The spacious balconies located directly above each entrance were used by the Führer as a speaker's platform on special occasions. Passing through the building's massive bronze doors, Hitler and his guests entered a world that the average German could only dream of. The glowing red marble staircase, which served as the centerpiece of the atrium, ascended visitors to the first-floor reception area and the chief office of the Führer. By using a collection of stately pillars, Trost was able to maintain his classic style, while incorporating several modern features such as skylights and air conditioning. The high quality of the finest woods, along with the outstanding craftsmanship of the time, is reflected in the tastefully hand-carved double doors leading to Hitler's office. The beautiful walnut inlaid paneling on the door's exterior carries through to a second set of doors on the reverse side. With the death of Professor Trost in 1934, The task of decorating the Führerbau's interior went to his wife Gertie. For the room's focal point, she chose an emerald green fireplace carved out of imported Italian marble, which was accented by an attractive brass frame within the opening. The room was further complemented by elegant tapestries and rare paintings, and featured a unique gilded circular chandelier which was designed by Mrs. Trost. Except for the bulbs, the fixture remains in original condition. The space, which has since been partitioned off, included Hitler's mahogany desk at one end, and the informal reception area in front of the fireplace with its semicircular seating arrangement at the other. The room was used just one time for official diplomatic purposes. It was here that the Munich conference between Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain, Edouard Daladier of France, Adolf Hitler of Germany, and Benito Mussolini of Italy was held on September 29, 1938. A few hours before the meeting began, Hitler and Mussolini had already devised a plan that would give the Sudentenland to Germany, which effectively determined the outcome of the conference before it ever began. By the time the British and French delegations arrived, there was nothing left to discuss. Throughout most of the afternoon and into the late evening, mock diplomacy would turn Hitler's demands into concessions. At 1:30 in the morning on September 30th, 1938, 4 signatures would seal the fate of a great nation and set the stage for World War II. The Munich Accords did little more than to sanction the German occupation of the Sudetenland, and at the same time give Hitler an open invitation to take the rest of the country at will. The area of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland covered more than 11,000 square miles along the country's western frontier and was occupied by almost 3 million Germans and 750,000 Czechs. On October 1st, 1938, less than 2 days after the Munich conference, German troops made their historic march into the Sudetenland to the jubilant cheers of thousands of Sudeten Germans. When Hitler crossed the border 2 days later, he was hailed as a great liberator who had come to free the ethnic Germans from the bondage of living in a multiracial Czechoslovak state. Hitler's skillfully orchestrated occupation of the Sudetenland was managed without even a single shot being fired, and became known historically as the War of Flowers. Meanwhile, in the Czech capital of Prague, events swiftly began unfolding for the worse. At Hradčany Castle on October 5th, Edvard Beneš resigned his post as president of Czechoslovakia under pressure from Berlin. His resignation came only 5 days after the Munich Accords. On November 30th, 1938, Emil Hacke was selected as the new president of a rapidly disintegrating country. 4 months later, on March 5, 1939, as German tanks rolled through the capital city, thousands of Praguers watched in horror as the nation of Czechoslovakia was erased from the map of Europe. When the German military entered the city that fateful day, they proceeded down the world-famous Wenceslas Square under the watchful eye of its legendary namesake. King Wenceslas, who was actually a 10th century Bohemian duke named Václav, served as the patron saint of Czechoslovakia. From the Great Boulevard, the German war machine marched into the heart of the city and Prague's 13th century old town and ancient trading center. As the Germans crossed the historic Charles Bridge, they came into full view of their final destination overlooking the city, the 14th century Prague Castle on Royal Hill. The Baroque castle known as Hradčany housed both the bishops of Prague and the Bohemian kings, and today is home to the President of the Czech Republic. It was here on March 16, 1939, after spending the night in the royal residence, that Adolf Hitler made his first and only appearance in the city of Prague. Surrounded by members of the SS leadership, including Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich, Hitler officially proclaimed the territories of Bohemia and Moravia as protectorates of the German Reich. Shortly after meeting members of the local press, Hitler announced the appointment of Baron Constantin von Neurath as Reichsprotector of the new territories. But the moderate von Neurath, who lacked support for the Führer's policies, proved much too soft for the position, and after only 2 years on the job was replaced by a much more effective and sinister leader. With the arrival of SS Gruppenfuhrer Reinhard Heydrich on September 27, 1941, came a policy of terror and fear implemented by the SS and Gestapo. Reinhard Heydrich began his military career as a cadet at the Naval Academy at Kiel, and later as a midshipman at the Marine Schule at Murvik. While his falsetto voice and high-pitched laugh prompted taunts from the other cadets, the ambitious Heydrich persevered, and by age 22 was serving as a communications officer with the rank of lieutenant. But when the daughter of a shipyard director complained that Heydrich had reneged on a promise of marriage, Admiral Erich Raeder charged him with conduct on becoming an officer, and he was summarily discharged from the service in 1931. Meanwhile, Hitler's Schutzstaffel, the SS, was rapidly becoming a powerful security and protection service, which had grown from a paltry 10,000 members in the fall of 1931 to more than 40,000 by the spring of 1932. At the same time, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler was planning to create an intelligence branch of the organization and was aggressively searching for a candidate to head the new department. After a brief 30-minute interview, Reinhard Heydrich joined the ranks of the SS leadership as a Sturmführer and chief of the SS security service, the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst. From his Munich office in the Braun house, Heydrich began building what would eventually become one of the most effective intelligence organizations in the world. Almost immediately, so-called enemies of the state were rounded up and shipped off to the notorious concentration camp, Dachau. Founded in March of 1933, thousands of politicians, communists, union leaders, criminals, and all others opposing the Nazi regime would suffer and die here during Dachau's 12-year existence. By the spring of 1934, Heydrich had reached the rank of SS Brigadeführer and was in complete control of the SD, Bavarian political police, and Prussian secret state police. It was also in 1934 that Heydrich and his young family moved from their modest two-bedroom Berlin apartment and into a spacious 9-room villa in the exclusive Berlin suburb of Schlachtensee. Just a few doors down was the home of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of military counterintelligence and one of Heydrich's closest friends during his early days in the Navy. Initially, the two became inseparable until a power struggle ensued between Canaris's Abwehr and Heydrich's security service. Eventually, the conflict would end with an agreement that not only defined both intelligence agencies, but also enhanced Heydrich's position with Himmler and the other leaders of the Third Reich. In the summer of 1934, another obstacle would once again test Heydrich's resolve: the elimination of Ernst Röhm and his SA stormtroopers in what would become known as the Night of the Long Knives. By spreading rumors that the SA and its 4 million members intended to start a revolution and seize control of the government, Heydrich was able to successfully plot the downfall of Röhm and the SA leadership. On the morning of June 30th, 1934, Röhm was arrested and sent to Stadelheim prison, where he was executed 2 days later. As a result of the coup, the SA was quickly surpassed in its power and importance by the SS, and by June of 1936, all local police organizations, along with the SD, the criminal police, and the Gestapo, were placed under the leadership of the Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, who answered only to Hitler. At about the same time, all SS security agencies were centralized in Berlin, with Gestapo headquarters operating out of the infamous No. 8 Albrechtstrasse, and the SD, the Reich Security Service and Criminal Police, conducting their business just around the corner at the Prince Albrecht Palace. In the fall of 1939, the building became the Reich Security Main Office, under the complete control of Reinhard Heydrich, who was now an SS Gruppenfuhrer, or Major General. Following the German occupation of Poland in September 1939, Heydrich unleashed his newly formed special action groups called Einsatzgruppen. These brutal killing squads were designed not only to terrorize the general public, but systematically round up and execute politicians, members of the clergy, professionals, and just about anyone else considered an enemy of the state. After the invasion of the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, the Einsatzgruppen continued their vicious killing spree with the mass execution of saboteurs, communists, partisans, and Jews. By the end of 1939, SS Gruppenfuhrer Reinhard Heydrich was nearing the pinnacle of his career. He was now considered the second most powerful man in the SS and was chief of all security operations throughout the Greater German Reich. With his arrival in Prague on September 27, 1941, as Deputy Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia, it marked the height of a brilliant yet diabolical career. He was now the governor of a country which he planned to Germanize while transforming its capital into one of the leading cities of the Third Reich. But it was Heydrich's role as chairman of a secret conference in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee that not only guaranteed his place in history, but ultimately led to the persecution and genocide of millions of people throughout Eastern and Western Europe. It was here at this secluded lakeside villa on January 20th, 1942, that the Enlösung der Judenfrage, the final solution to the Jewish question, was finally answered. Surrounded by 13 bureaucrats and dozens of adjutants, Reinhard Heydrich, along with SS Obergruppenfuhrer Adolf Eichmann, formulated the financial, legal, and technical blueprint for the evacuation and extermination of an estimated 11 million Jews from all over Europe. Today, the house is a Holocaust memorial and education center with a permanent exhibition documenting both the conference and the final solution. Through a series of photographs, the exhibit depicts Jewish life in various ghettos like Lodz, Lublin, and Warsaw, where beatings and shootings were commonplace, and filth, disease, and starvation were rampant. The display also focuses on the various extermination camps, such as Majdanek, Belzec, Chelmno, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Auschwitz-Birkenau, where gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, Jews, and other groups numbering in the millions were led to their deaths. By the time Heydrich returned to Prague, both the city and its people had been completely immersed into a German culture and society. Walking the streets of Prague in the spring of 1942 was like a walk through the city of Berlin. And it was the job of the sinister Reichsprotector to make sure that it stayed that way. Serving as Heydrich's deputy was Karl Hermann Frank, a Sudeten German who despised the Czech people. It was Frank, along with Konrad Heinlein, who helped create the unrest in the Sudentenland, which ultimately paved the way for Hitler to take control of the region in 1938. As a reward, Frank was appointed State Secretary of the Protectorate and Chief of Police of Bohemian Moravia, which gave him complete authority over the entire police system. Karl Hermann Frank also knew how to enjoy the trappings of power. His luxurious villa in the exclusive Prague suburb of Pananska Brzeziny consisted of more than 30 rooms and occupied over a dozen acres. Just down the hill was the sprawling estate of Frank's boss, SS Obergruppenfuhrer Reinhard Heydrich. Other than the gatehouse, all that remains of the mansion today is the opulent 20-room guest house and a few pieces of garden statuary. It was from here on the morning of May 27, 1942, that the Deputy Reichsprotector kissed his wife and children goodbye and began the final journey to his office at the Harrachani Castle. At about 10:30, as Heydrich's car descended the Kirchmeierstrasse, it was forced to slow to a crawl as it approached the hairpin turn at the bottom of the hill. As the Mercedes rounded the corner, a man with a submachine gun stepped from the curb and at point-blank range pulled the trigger. Realizing that the gun had misfired, Heydrich foolishly ordered his driver to stop. It would prove to be a fatal mistake. It was at that moment that a second man tossed a grenade which exploded from the rear passenger side of the vehicle. The enormous blast not only caused severe damage to the door and undercarriage, but blew a gaping hole in the car's rear quarter panel. At the same time, fragments of the bomb penetrated the seat, and together with several tiny particles of the upholstery, entered Heydrich's spleen, which went undetected until it was too late. Several days after undergoing major surgery, Heydrich developed an infection, and at 7:30 on the morning of June 4, 1942, he was pronounced dead. 3 days later, in the forecourt of Harrachani Castle, thousands of Czechs in a mock exhibition of respect filed past the Reichsprotector's coffin, which was flanked by an SD honor guard. On the evening of June 7, 1942, Heydrich's coffin was paraded across the Charles Bridge, through the streets of Prague's Old Town, up the great boulevard to Wenceslaw Square, and finally to the main train station where it was transported to Berlin for burial. 2 days later, the elaborate funeral of SS Obergruppenfuhrer Reinhard Heydrich was held in the Mosaic Saal of the Reichschancellery. The event was attended by hundreds of dignitaries and special guests like Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, Heydrich's younger brother Heinz, and his 2 young sons, Klaus and Heider. The solemn 2-hour-long ceremony, which was restricted to men only, included an exulting and passionate eulogy by the Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler. From the chancellery, the coffin was placed on a horse-drawn gun carriage, which proceeded down the Wilhelmstrasse for the 5-mile journey to Heydrich's final resting place at the Invaliden Friedhof. Founded in 1748, the Invaliden Cemetery would become the final resting place for some of Germany's most celebrated heroes and personalities, such as the builder of the Autobahns, Dr. Engineer Fritz Todt, from the First World War, General Hans von Seeckt, and the legendary Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. Other notables include Infantry General Otto Hasse and Luftwaffe General Ernst Udet. In a strange twist of fate, World War II flying ace Werner Mulders was killed in a plane crash en route to the general's funeral. He's buried directly behind Udet. At the time of his death, Mulders had 115 air victories to his credit and was the most decorated soldier in the Third Reich. Nearby is the gravestone of Werner von Fritsch, the general whose career was nearly brought to an end with false accusations of homosexuality. His chief accuser lies just a few feet away. The gravesite of Reinhard Heydrich, with its foundations of what would have been a monumental tomb, has remained unkept for more than 6 decades. However, on June 9, 1942, the gravesite was the scene of the most spectacular funeral to date at the Invaliden Friedhof. 9 days after Heydrich's funeral, units of the Waffen-SS surrounded the church of St. Cyril and Methodius, the hiding place of the assassins. As the Germans approached the altar, the Czech patriots opened fire from the choir loft, which ignited a ferocious 2-hour gun battle, resulting in the death of 2 of the assassins. Dead was Jan Kubisch, a decorated warrant officer from Moravia who launched the fatal grenade that ultimately ended Heydrich's life. Also killed on the choir loft was the leader of the team, Lieutenant Adolf Opolka, a Czech patriot who served as one of the lookouts on the day of the assassination. Meanwhile, the SS had cordoned off the entire area around the church, and a fire brigade was called in to flood the basement where the remaining assassins were hiding. The ventilator shaft leading into the crypt still bears the scars of both the fire hoses and the violent gun battle. Today, the crypt serves as a memorial to the Czech patriots and chronicles their courageous struggle, which tragically ended with the deaths of Josef Volček, the second lookout on the day of the assassination, and the Slovakian-born Josef Gabček, whose stun gun misfired when he was just inches away from Heydrich's car. In all, 7 Czech patriots lost their lives during the 6-hour-long gun battle, 3 in the choir loft and 4 in the crypt. The names of all 7 are inscribed on a bronze plaque outside the church, which commemorates their heroic fight. Within days after Heydrich's death, State Secretary Karl Frank announced that a policy of mass retribution would be launched against the people of the Protectorate, and boasted that in this tranquil field where the village of Lidice once stood, only corn would grow. On the morning of June 10, 1942, the day after Heydrich's funeral, the little village located 10 miles northwest of Prague was invaded by units of the security police, who began the process of erasing it from the face of the earth, and thereby teaching the people of the Protectorate a lesson in both submission and humility. Under the command of SS Hauptsturmführer Max Rostock, the village was reduced to rubble, and the women and children rounded up and shipped off to various concentration camps. The men, ranging in age from 14 to 83, were separated into groups of 10, marched to a nearby farmhouse, and executed. In just a matter of a few hours, all 173 of Lidice's men and boys were gunned down in cold blood. Of the village's 98 children, only 4 from the first grade class were ever seen again. Several monuments now dot the landscape where the village once stood, but perhaps none more poignant than the bronze sculpture in memory of the innocent children, who have come to symbolize the persecuted victims of Nazi tyranny and the brutality of the regime throughout the occupied territories.